The voicemail light blinked red beside my coffee, steady as a heartbeat she'd never notice. Still, I stirred the spoon slowly, listening to the silence my daughter once filled with excuses. As the steam curled upward, it smelled like hospital air, warm, sterile, and empty of care. While the cup cooled, I remembered the text she ignored. Just bring a blanket. The same hand that reached for help now signs her out of my will with calm precision. That's when I knew. Motherhood ends the moment mercy isn't returned. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The ceiling tiles above her blurred in and out of focus, squares of beige light melting together as the morphine dulled everything except the cold. Marjorie Lane blinked against the sterile glare, her throat dry, her lips cracked. The sound of distant monitors pulsed through the recovery ward. Faint beeps, rubber soles squeaking, the hum of a television no one was watching. A nurse had tucked the sheet to her chest, but the air still leaked through the gaps like winter seeping under an old door. She tried to shift her legs, wincing when the movement sent pain lancing up her hip. The new joint felt foreign, heavy, like someone else's bone sewn into her. She reached for her phone on the tray. The effort made her arm tremble. The lock screen lit up. A photo of Oscar, her golden retriever, mouth open in a clumsy grin. Her chest ached. A notification blinked from the kennel. Oscar hasn't eaten today. Seems anxious. Whining a lot. Marjorie exhaled slowly. He won't eat unless he sees me, she whispered, though no one was there to hear it. She opened the family group chat. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard. The morphine haze made it hard to think, but she typed carefully. Marjorie. Could someone check on Oscar? Bring me a blanket, please. It's freezing in here. She reread it twice, making sure it didn't sound too needy. Then she hit send. The message popped up with the little gray checkmark, floating above the last exchange. A meme Tina had sent 2 weeks ago about strong, independent women who don't need help. Marjorie watched the screen. 3 dots didn't appear. Nothing changed. Outside her curtained cubicle, a gurney rolled by. Someone groaned. Someone else laughed down the hall. The world went on, indifferent. She waited another minute, then another 5. Still nothing. The chill deepened. She pressed the call button, but when the nurse arrived, a young man with kind eyes and a tired smile, he only adjusted her blanket and said, "We'll get you a fresh one soon, Mrs. Lane." Soon. Everything was soon. When he left, she opened the chat again and stared at her daughter's name. Tina Lane. Little profile picture of a beach cocktail and sunglasses. Then Reese, her grandson, his graduation photo from last spring. She retyped, Marjorie. Can anyone help feed Oscar? Or just call the kennel? He's not eating. Her thumb hovered, then pressed send again. The clock on the phone read 3:12 p.m. By 3:30, she'd started to shiver. She tucked her chin down, rubbing her arms through the thin hospital gown. Every inhale stung. The antiseptic scent of the room made her think of emptiness, of how soundless life became when no one was near enough to hear you breathe. She imagined Tina's phone lighting up, ignored between brunch mimosas and selfies. Reese, maybe at his college library, scrolling past it. Maybe thinking she'd be fine. She usually was. Her vision blurred again. She closed her eyes, drifting in and out of light sleep, until the nurse returned with a new blanket, thin but warm enough to stop her shaking. Better? He asked. She nodded. Yes, thank you. He smiled faintly. You don't have anyone local? Someone to bring things in? The question landed like a bruise. My daughter's in town, she said softly. She's busy. He hesitated. The way people do when kindness runs out of answers. Well, If you need anything, I'm here until 6. When he left again, the silence returned, thicker this time. She reached for the phone one more time, her hands trembling as she scrolled. Still no replies. No read receipts. On impulse, she sent one last message. Marjorie. Never mind. Then she placed the phone face down on the tray and turned toward the window. The city outside was frozen, Minneapolis under a sheet of snow, traffic muted, sky the color of steel. Somewhere out there, Oscar sat in a kennel run, waiting for a door to open. Marjorie closed her eyes against the bright, indifferent light. A tear slipped sideways into her hairline. Tomorrow, she thought. They'll see. And then the heart monitor beeped once, sharply, as if marking a vow. The next morning, sunlight crept through the half-open blinds, weak, gray, and filtered by frost. The snow outside hadn't stopped. It pressed against the windows in quiet drifts, the kind that muffled every sound and made the world feel sealed off. Marjorie blinked awake to the same mechanical rhythm of beeps, to the same IV line tugging gently at her arm. Her phone sat exactly where she'd left it, face down on the tray. For a moment, she let herself believe there might be a glow beneath it, a string of missed calls, a reply, something. She reached for it slowly. The screen lit up. Nothing. The timestamp on her last message glared back at her. 3:12 p.m. the day before. 24 hours had come and gone. A hollow stillness opened in her chest, something colder than the hospital air. The world hadn't stopped, because she had needed them. It hadn't even paused. The breakfast tray arrived with a plastic smile, scrambled eggs, toast, a carton of orange juice sweating through thin paper. The smell made her stomach turn. A volunteer. Maybe in her early 20s, all optimism and bright blue scrubs, appeared at her bedside with a clipboard. Mrs. Lane, how are we feeling today? Just fine, Marjorie said, though her voice came out thin, sandpapered. Let's get you sitting up for breakfast, okay? The girl adjusted the bed and slid a pillow behind her back, chatting about her nursing classes, about how she was only here on weekends. Marjorie nodded in the right places, though the words passed through her like wind through an empty hallway. When the volunteer left, she forced herself to lift the fork. Her hand trembled halfway to her mouth. She gave up and stared at the cold eggs until the smell of disinfectant overpowered them. The door opened again, this time with the soft authority of someone used to being listened to. Dr. Lizette Marsh stepped in, her white coat crisp, her eyes tired but alert. Good morning, Mrs. Lane. How's the pain? It's manageable. Are you managing you, though? Dr. Marsh asked, scanning her vitals. Marjorie gave a faint smile. That depends on your definition. The doctor adjusted the chart, then looked directly at her. That look isn't from the pain meds. You seem detached. Marjorie blinked hard. I just thought I'd have heard from my family by now. Dr. Marsh's mouth tightened. Sometimes people freeze up when they don't know what to say. Doesn't mean they don't care. Doesn't mean they do either, Marjorie murmured. Before the doctor could respond, her phone vibrated. The hospital landline, not Marjorie's. She stepped into the hall, took the call, and returned with a different expression. Your dog's boarding kennel just called, she said carefully. They said he hasn't eaten in 2 days. They're worried. Marjorie's throat constricted. Oscar? They wanted permission to release him to someone familiar. Do you have a neighbor or friend who can take him temporarily? Yes. Her voice wavered, then steadied. Diane. She's next door. He knows her. Dr. Marsh nodded, jotting it down. I'll authorize it. He'll be all right. When she left, Marjorie sat very still. Her phone buzzed once. Her heart jumped. But it was only a spam notification from her grocery app. She almost laughed. A little later, the volunteer returned to collect the tray. Any family visiting today? Marjorie hesitated. Maybe tomorrow, she lied. After the girl left, she opened her phone again. Instagram loaded slowly on the hospital Wi-Fi. She hadn't planned to look, but curiosity, or cruelty, made her search her daughter's name. There it was. A brunch table, sunlight streaming through a downtown cafe window, Tina holding a glass of champagne. Caption: Sunday reset with my favorite people. Reese had liked the post. Marjorie stared at the screen until her reflection blurred into the image. Pale face, thinning gray hair, hospital gown stark against sterile white. A different kind of ache spread through her chest, heavier than pain, older than disappointment. She placed the phone down, this time carefully, as though setting something fragile she didn't want to see break. The monitor beside her beeped in quiet rhythm. Outside, a snowplow scraped down the street, slow, deliberate, uncaring. The silence pressed in, thicker than before. She turned her face toward the window again, whispering to the frost on the glass. "You hear me, don't you?" No answer came, just her own breath fogging the pain. And as the day dimmed into a flat gray evening, the phone screen lit up once more. Not from Tina, not from Reese, but from an automated message from the kennel confirming Oscar released to neighbor Diane as requested. Marjorie exhaled. A faint tremor of relief, or finality, moved through her. Then, softly, she said into the empty room, "At least someone's coming home." The discharge papers crackled in her trembling hands, a neat stack of bureaucratic relief. Marjorie signed the last page, the pen wobbling slightly in her grip. Her hip ached with every minor shift, but the ache was no longer her greatest discomfort. It was the quiet. The nurse, an older man this time, folded her blanket, placed it in a bag, and smiled as if that simple gesture could erase everything she'd endured. "Your neighbor's here to pick you up," he said. Marjorie nodded, the motion slow but steady. The walker stood ready beside her, silver metal gleaming under the fluorescent light. She gripped it and pulled herself upright. The room tilted briefly before settling back into focus. "Take your time," the nurse said softly. "There's no rush." There had been nothing but rush before. Appointments, meals, texts, errands, the kind of life filled with motion but not meaning. Now, every step felt deliberate. Each shuffle of her walker a quiet punctuation mark against the tile floor. Outside, the air bit at her face, sharper than she'd expected. Minneapolis in February, a wind that could scrape the soul clean. Diane's SUV idled at the curb, exhaust curling into the pale sky. When the passenger door opened, the sound that came next nearly broke her. Oscar barked once, then again, higher, desperate, joyous. His tail thudded against the seatbelt, golden fur pressed to the window. "Oh, sweetheart," Marjorie whispered, lowering herself into the seat as best she could. Oscar clambered across the console before Diane could stop him, pressing his head against Marjorie's chest, whining softly. "Careful," Diane said, laughing through tears. "He's been a mess without you." "So have I," Marjorie murmured, burying her face in his fur. He smelled faintly of snow and kennel shampoo, and under that, home. The drive back was short. Houses passed in blurs of white and gray, porches draped with icicles, mailboxes half buried in snowbanks. Marjorie stared out the window, her reflection faint in the glass. Pale, older, and newly certain. When they pulled into her driveway, Diane jumped out first to help her with the walker. The house looked smaller somehow, hunched beneath the frost. But as soon as the door opened, Oscar darted in, circling the living room with unrestrained joy before collapsing at the hearth. Marjorie smiled faintly. "He knows where warmth lives." "Are you sure you'll be okay on your own?" Diane asked, lingering in the doorway. "I've been okay on my own for a long time," Marjorie said, and for the first time. It didn't sound like pride. It sounded like truth. Diane nodded, reluctant, but trusting. "Call me if you need anything. I'll check in tomorrow." When the door closed behind her, the house exhaled. Marjorie took her time crossing the floor, each tap of the walker echoing off the wood. She lowered herself into her favorite armchair by the fireplace and reached for the remote. The click was soft, and then flames licked to life. Orange and gold reflections dancing in Oscar's eyes as he rested his head on her slipper. She sat there for a long time, letting the silence fill the room. It wasn't the same silence as the hospital. This one had weight, shape, purpose. The kind of quiet that listens. Wind rattled the windows, snow brushing against the panes like fingertips. Somewhere, a car passed by, its tires whispering through slush. Marjorie reached for her phone. The screen glowed against the dim light. No messages. Still nothing from Tina. Still nothing from Reese. Her thumb hovered over the group chat, then drifted to the Notes app instead. She opened a new page. The cursor blinked like a metronome. Next steps. Legal. She stared at the words for a long time. Then she added another line, slower, deliberate. "I think it's time." Oscar lifted his head as if sensing the shift. She leaned forward and stroked his ears, whispering, "They made their choice. Now I'll make mine." The phone felt heavier in her palm as she scrolled through her contacts. Her eyes found the name she hadn't used in years, Eloise Tan, estate planner. Calm voice, steady mind, sharp memory. She pressed call. The line rang twice before a low, professional voice answered. "Eloise Tan." Marjorie's throat tightened. "It's Marjorie Lane. I think it's time I re-examine a few things." A pause then. "Understood. Let's start with what matters most." Marjorie looked toward the fire. The reflection of the flames shimmered in her eyes. That would be who deserves what's left. Outside, wind howled through the street, a long, hollow cry that faded into stillness. Oscar lifted his head again, ears pricked. Marjorie smiled faintly. "Don't worry," she said. "I'm not going anywhere just yet." She leaned back in her chair, watching the fire consume the first log, her decision settling in her chest like embers, quiet, controlled, and certain. But behind the calm, a vow began to take shape. Not anger, not spite. Something sharper. By the time the last flame flickered out, she knew exactly what she would do next. Morning came in shades of pale gray, the kind that made even firelight look tired. Marjorie sat at her kitchen table with a mug of tea that had long gone cold. The house was still, except for the ticking of the old clock above the pantry. A sound she'd stopped hearing years ago, but now couldn't escape. Oscar snored softly at her feet, paws twitching in some dream that looked kinder than waking life. Marjorie reached for the bottom drawer of the built-in hutch, the one that stuck if you didn't tug just right. It gave way with a wooden sigh, revealing a tangle of old files, folded receipts, and a thin envelope yellowed by years. The handwriting on the front was hers. Family distribution. Her pulse kicked once, slow and deliberate. She slid it free, brushing dust from the edges, and placed it in front of her like a relic she wasn't sure she wanted to unearth. When she finally opened it, the paper crackled like dry leaves. The first page bore Eloise's firm signature and neat legal type, the careful architecture of the life she'd built and who she thought would outlive her. Primary beneficiaries: Tina Lane, 60% of estate assets; Reese Lane, 20% plus vehicle and residuals. Pet care. Trust, maintenance fund for Oscar's welfare. She read it twice. By the third time, her lips had tightened into a thin white line. 60%, she whispered. The number felt obscene now, like an overstatement of love that no longer existed. Oscar stirred at her feet, whined softly. She reached down to scratch his neck. You got the smallest line, didn't you, boy? Just enough to keep you fed. He pressed his nose against her knee, unconcerned, faithful. The phone on the table buzzed, a message preview flashing from Eloise. Eloise Tan. Tomorrow still good for review? Bring all existing documents. Marjorie typed back with deliberate slowness. Marjorie. Yes. I've decided they need adjusting. That night she didn't sleep. The fire burned low, casting long shadows that reached across the floorboards. She sat with a notepad on her lap, listing every person who had shown up when she needed something, and it wasn't a long list. By morning, she was at Eloise's office. The building was small and discreet, tucked between a dentist and a florist. No gleaming tower, no glass walls, just a brass plaque that read, Eloise Tan, ESQ, Estate and Elder Planning. Eloise herself opened the door. Her silver hair pulled into a tidy twist, her dark suit sharp enough to slice through sentiment. Marjorie, she said warmly, gesturing to a leather chair. You look determined. I am, Marjorie replied, settling in. She placed the envelope on the desk. I brought the old will. Eloise's fingers were careful as she unfolded it. You did this back in 2018, correct? Yes. Back when I thought I'd raised people who would notice if I vanished for a few days. The lawyer's expression softened, just a flicker of empathy before professionalism resumed. Let's go through it line by line. They did. Slowly, methodically, each percentage, each clause, each neatly typed provision for people who hadn't answered a single message when she lay alone in that hospital bed. When they reached the section labeled Family Allocations, Marjorie leaned back in her chair. The fluorescent light hummed faintly above them. That's not going to work anymore, she said, her voice even. Eloise glanced up. Meaning? Marjorie folded her hands. Meaning, I don't see why silence should be rewarded. Eloise nodded once, unflustered. Then let's start crossing names. She drew a pen from her jacket pocket, a slim silver one that clicked with satisfying finality. She drew a single line through Tina's name, the ink smooth and permanent. Marjorie watched it happen. The motion was small, almost elegant, but the air in the room shifted as if some unseen cord had been severed. For Reese? Eloise asked. Marjorie hesitated. He's young, but he's her son. Let's mark him for review. Pending clause, Eloise said, making a notation. Performance-based inheritance. We can design one that measures intent and action, not just blood. Marjorie smiled faintly. That sounds fair. And Oscar? Her hand drifted to the leash coiled in her purse. He gets the house. Eloise's brow lifted slightly. The house? Yes, Marjorie said. Through a trust. He'll need someone to live here, of course, but the deed belongs to his care. Eloise didn't argue. She only wrote, deliberate and composed. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, relentless flakes against the window pane. The world beyond the office blurred, as if dissolving behind a veil of white. When Eloise finally looked up, her eyes were calm but curious. Marjorie, this kind of restructuring isn't just financial. It's emotional. Are you sure? Marjorie met her gaze squarely. I've never been sure of anything. The lawyer gave a slow, measured nod. Then we'll make it legal. Marjorie reached for her tea, untouched, now cold, and smiled thinly. Make it ironclad. Eloise's pen moved across the paper again, crossing, rewriting, sealing. The faint scratch of ink became the only sound in the room, the quiet, deliberate rhythm of a woman reclaiming her worth. When it stopped, Eloise recapped the pen and said softly, Done. They won't see it coming. Marjorie exhaled, her breath trembling but sure. Good, she said. They didn't see me coming either. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the office windows, the world itself punctuating her promise. Snow fell thick and slow over downtown Minneapolis, blanketing the city in a silence that felt almost ceremonial, the kind of stillness that marked endings and beginnings. Inside Eloise Tan's office, the radiator hissed softly, and a pot of coffee steamed beside a stack of manila folders. Marjorie sat across the polished walnut desk, her cane propped against her knee. The pain in her hip was dull today, manageable, the sort that reminded her she was healing, in more ways than one. Eloise adjusted her glasses and pushed a new draft of the will toward her. "I've incorporated your revisions from yesterday," she said, "but I think we can go further. This is the moment to decide what your name will mean when you're gone." Marjorie looked down at the pages. Her signature, neat but trembling, already graced the first two. The rest were still clean, untouched. "Let's go line by line again," Eloise said. Marjorie nodded. "Tina Lane, removed entirely," Eloise began, matter of fact. She uncapped her pen and drew a solid line through the column where Tina's name once lived. Marjorie watched it disappear, ink devouring the space that had once belonged to her daughter. No thunder cracked, no emotion spilled over. Just the quiet satisfaction of precision. Eloise continued. "Reese Lane will retain a provisional clause. I've written it as contingent beneficiary subject to behavioral evaluation and relational reconciliation. He'll have to earn his inheritance." "Earn," Marjorie repeated softly. "That's the word I wish I'd taught them both sooner." She took a sip of her cooling tea. Oscar's photo stared up from the lock screen of her phone beside her papers. The same grin, the same open devotion. "And for Oscar," Eloise said, flipping to the next page. "We've created a pet trust, but you wanted more than just care. You wanted the house to belong to his name." "Yes." Marjorie leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "That home holds every version of me they ignored. The mother, the widow, the woman who begged for a blanket no one brought. If it has to belong to someone, it belongs to loyalty." Eloise smiled faintly. "Then the deed will transfer to an animal trust, with a designated human trustee for maintenance. I suggest we name a professional caretaker, or someone you personally trust." Marjorie hesitated, then said, "Dr. Lisette Marsh." Eloise's pen paused mid-note. "Your surgeon?" "She's the only person who noticed when I disappeared behind hospital curtains," Marjorie said. "She didn't owe me anything, but she showed up anyway. That's more family than blood ever was." Eloise nodded, writing steadily. "And the power of attorney? Make her my healthcare proxy, effective immediately." There was a moment of silence as the pen moved again, another deliberate line of ink that carried the weight of a lifetime's correction. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows, whistling low through the old frames. Marjorie sat straighter. She could feel the shift in herself. Something thawing, something stealing. Eloise placed the papers neatly into a folder and looked up. "Marjorie, I've been doing this work for 30 years. Most people who make these changes do it out of spite or panic. You're the first I've seen do it out of clarity." Marjorie's lips curved slightly. When you lie in a hospital bed begging for a blanket and your own daughter doesn't answer, clarity comes easy. Eloise folded her hands. "Then may I make one addition?" "Go ahead." Eloise uncapped her pen again and wrote slowly across the margin. "Beneficiaries revised to reflect care, not relation." She looked up, meeting Marjorie's eyes. "The only people who helped you weren't related to you, and those," she said softly, "are the ones who inherit." Marjorie stared at the words, black ink cutting through years of misplaced trust. She felt no guilt, no sting of hesitation, only a strange, crystalline peace. "I'd like to sign now," she said. Eloise slid the final page toward her. Here. Marjorie took the pen. Her hand shook slightly, but her signature came out strong, deliberate. The letters looped and closed cleanly, as if sealing a vault. When it was done, Eloise stood, extending her hand. Congratulations, you've just rewritten your legacy. Marjorie rose with her cane, slow but unwavering. No, she said, her voice steady. I just made sure it matches who I really am. They shook hands, firm, respectful. Eloise moved to the window, watching the snow swirl over the street below. When they find out, they'll come knocking. Marjorie gathered her papers, tucking them into her bag beside Oscar's leash. Then I'll let the silence answer them back. She turned to leave, the sound of her cane tapping softly against the floor. A rhythm of finality. Before she reached the door, Eloise called after her. Marjorie? She glanced back. You realize this changes everything? Marjorie's smile was faint, but her eyes gleamed like frost under morning sun. That's the point. She opened the door, stepping out into the cold. The wind caught her coat, carrying the scent of snow and freedom. Behind her, in that quiet office, her old life lay folded neatly in a folder marked superseded, every false bond, every unanswered message erased in ink. The snow had stopped, but the cold still held the city in its teeth. By late afternoon, the sky was the color of tin, the kind that promised another storm before morning. Marjorie sat in her armchair with a stack of documents beside her. New, crisp, legally binding. The fire whispered in the hearth, and Oscar lay curled by her feet, his breathing steady, rhythmic, a quiet metronome against the ticking of the clock. Her phone buzzed on the table. For a moment she didn't recognize the number. Then she did. Tina. She let it ring twice before answering. Hello? Mom. The voice came through bright, airy, as though layered with an old, performative warmth. I saw you called that estate lawyer again. Eloise, are you okay? You're not doing something dramatic, are you? Marjorie smiled faintly, though the motion hurt more than it should have. Dramatic? Well, you know. Tina laughed. That laugh, sharp and rehearsed, meant to disarm. I figured you were fine. You're tough, Mom. Always have been. There it was. The line. The convenient mythology of her resilience, the armor everyone else wore to justify their absence. Marjorie stared at the fire as she spoke. Tough doesn't mean untouched, Tina. Come on, Tina said, sighing. I had so much going on. Brunch with a client, the fundraiser. Ah, Marjorie interrupted softly. Yes. Brunch. The silence that followed was short, but it bit. I needed a blanket, Marjorie said. Her tone was calm, almost conversational, but her words hung heavy. You needed brunch. Oh, for God's sake. You're not still mad about that, Tina scoffed. I mean, seriously? Dead seriously, Marjorie said. Her voice didn't rise, didn't crack. It simply landed, final, undeniable. The kind of sentence that ended a decade-long argument without needing explanation. Mom, Tina said after a beat, her voice shifting into that blend of frustration and guilt. You're overreacting. I thought the hospital had you taken care of. You always said you didn't want to be a burden. Marjorie's eyes drifted toward the window, where frost feathered the corners of the glass. A burden? She repeated. Is that what asking for a blanket makes someone now? A burden? Tina sighed, that familiar sound of impatience disguised as exhaustion. You know what I mean. You make people feel guilty for not being you. Marjorie smiled again. A slow, sad curve of the mouth. No, dear. I make people face who they really are. Mom. But she'd already had enough. The air in the room felt thinner, cleaner, as if the act of listening had contaminated it. Tina. Marjorie said softly. I'm tired. Then rest, okay? Stop worrying about all this legal nonsense. Reese and I can help you sort things out later. No, Marjorie said. You can't. And before Tina could respond, before she could try to fill the silence with another excuse, Marjorie pressed the red icon on the screen. The call ended mid-breath. The fire cracked once, a low pop, like punctuation. She set the phone down, tapped the screen again, and opened her contact list. Her thumb hesitated only briefly before she selected block this caller. A small window appeared, asking for confirmation. Block Tina Lane? You will no longer receive calls, messages, or FaceTime from this person. Her finger pressed, confirm. The room was still again. Oscar stirred, sensing the shift. He nudged her arm with his nose, tail brushing gently against the rug. Marjorie looked down at him, her eyes softening. Come here, boy, she whispered. He climbed halfway onto her lap, heavy and warm. She pulled the throw blanket from the back of the chair and draped it over both of them, tucking it around his shoulders. There, she murmured, stroking his fur. You see? When someone needs warmth, you bring it. That's how it's done. The firelight glinted off the edge of the signed document stacked beside her. The testament of what she'd done, what she'd changed. Her name on every page, her choice in every line. She sat that way for a long time, listening to the faint hum of the furnace, the steady pulse of Oscar's breathing. Her phone vibrated once on the table, a voicemail alert. She didn't reach for it. She didn't need to. Instead, she whispered into the quiet. That was the last ask I'll ever make. Outside, the snow began again, soft, relentless, and silent. And in the faint reflection of the window, Marjorie could see herself smiling. Not with bitterness, but with the kind of peace that only comes once the door finally closes for good. The pen felt heavier this time, maybe because she knew exactly what it meant. Marjorie sat at the same walnut table in Eloise's office, the window panes rimmed with frost, the city outside caught in that deep January hush, the kind that swallowed even sirens. Oscar rested under the table, his muzzle on her shoe. A silent witness to everything she was signing away. Eloise adjusted the document stack between them. This one is different from your will, she explained, her voice steady but low, as though speaking something sacred. Once you sign this trust, it can't be changed. Not by you, not by anyone else. Marjorie nodded. That's exactly what I want. Eloise turned a page, sliding it toward her. The house, the accounts, the residual estate, everything moves into the trust's name. It's a shield. If anyone tries to contest it, they get nothing. No negotiations, no appeals. No second chances. Marjorie murmured, almost to herself. Oscar shifted beside her foot, letting out a quiet, sympathetic whine. She reached down, brushing her fingers through his fur. I know, boy, but we've given enough chances, haven't we? Eloise hesitated, then placed a gloved hand over the edge of the papers. You're certain, Marjorie? This shuts the door permanently. Even if they change, Marjorie finished for her. People like Tina don't change. They perform regret when it costs them something. I'm done funding performances. The lawyer's expression softened just slightly. Then let's make it official. The first signature went onto the page with a deliberate stroke. Marjorie Lane, bold, unwavering. The second signature followed, locking the trust's authority into place. Eloise added hers below, then reached for the notary seal. As the heavy press clamped down, the sound echoed in the small office. A clean, final click that sounded almost like a lock turning shut. There, Eloise said. Irrevocable. Ironclad. Frozen over. Just like that night you sent the message that no one answered. Marjorie's lips curved faintly. That's the one thing I want remembered. For a moment, neither woman spoke. The air between them held the faint scent of coffee and cold paper, something strangely comforting. Then Eloise gathered the stack, clipped it together, and placed it neatly in an envelope stamped "Confidential Trust Agreement." "You'll receive the certified copy in a week. Keep this one for your records. No digital file exists. Safer that way." Marjorie slid it into her leather folder. "Good. I don't trust clouds, digital or human." Eloise chuckled softly. "You have a dark wit, Mrs. Lane." "I earned it," Marjorie said. When she stepped outside, the cold wrapped around her like clarity. She walked slowly to the car, Oscar's leash looped around her wrist, his paw prints dotting the snow beside her. Back home, the house greeted her with its familiar stillness, the smell of pine logs, the faint hum of the furnace. She set her folder on the table and eased herself into her chair, her hip aching just enough to remind her that healing didn't erase history. Her phone buzzed on the armrest. A message. Reese. "Hey, Grandma. Mom said you were fine. Sorry I didn't check in sooner." She stared at the text for a long time, thumb hovering over the screen. Her heart didn't twist the way it used to. It just settled. Oscar nudged her knee again, sensing the hesitation. She set the phone down. Face down this time, the message still unread. Instead, she reached for the folder, flipped it open, and filed the trust paperwork in her personal safe, between the birth certificates and old insurance forms. Each page slid in cleanly, without resistance. When she closed the safe, the latch clicked. That same satisfying, deliberate sound of something sealed and done. Marjorie turned back toward the living room. The fire had burned low, embers pulsing faintly beneath gray ash. She crouched, slower than she used to, and added a new log. The flames caught quickly, greedy and bright. "Good boy," she said softly, watching Oscar curl tighter against the hearth. "You and me, we keep the fire alive." Her phone buzzed once more. Another message. The preview lit the dark room. "Mom's mad. Said you're making mistakes you'll regret." Marjorie didn't even open it this time. She turned the phone off completely, the screen fading to black. She leaned back in her chair, letting the warmth wash over her, the glow reflecting in her eyes. Outside, the snow thickened again, wrapping the house in a quiet the world couldn't breach. On the table beside her, the legal folder sat heavy and sure, a monument to a single truth. Some doors aren't meant to reopen. As the fire crackled, Eloise's words echoed softly in her mind. Ironclad. Frozen over. Marjorie whispered to the flames, "Good. Let it stay that way." Then, from the quiet, Oscar lifted his head, ears perked, as if he'd heard something outside. A faint knock, distant, uncertain. Marjorie didn't move. She only smiled. "Too late," she said under her breath. "You should have called when it mattered." The next morning arrived thin and blue, light struggling through the frost-glazed windows. The fire had gone out sometime before dawn, leaving only a curl of smoke rising from blackened logs. Marjorie sat at the kitchen table in her robe, the house still except for the quiet rhythm of Oscar's nails clicking on the hardwood as he padded toward her. "Good morning, boy," she said softly. Her voice sounded stronger in the quiet, firmer, almost at ease. She reached for her phone, meaning to check the weather. Instead, a notification from social media glowed at the top of the screen. "Tina Lane tagged you in a post." Marjorie's thumb froze above the screen. When she opened it, the world shrank to that one image. Tina sat at a restaurant patio, the kind that pretended winter didn't exist. Glass heaters glowed behind her, casting soft amber halos on champagne flutes. Reese sat beside her, half smiling, wearing the same parka he'd worn last Christmas. Between them, a plate of oysters, a tall mimosa, a caption typed in bright, Effortless letters. Family first, nothing matters more. The words hit harder than she expected. Marjorie zoomed in, studying the curve of Reese's smile. He looked uneasy, like someone who'd been told to pose when he didn't want to. Tina's grin, though, that was perfect. Wide, flawless, practiced. Without hesitation, Marjorie pressed and held the image. A small pop-up appeared. Save photo. She tapped it, then swiped to her hidden folder, the one labeled Legal, Personal, Upload Complete. Evidence, she murmured to herself. Her tone wasn't angry, just factual, steady. Oscar nudged her knee under the table. She reached down and rubbed behind his ears. Proof, old friend. It's all just proof now. She opened her notes app next, the file she'd begun a week earlier, end-of-life draft. Her fingers moved deliberately across the screen, adjusting sentences, deleting names. Tina, deleted. Reese, pending. Oscar, included, bolded with a clause marked in capital letters. Ensure ongoing care through trust. Below that, she added a new line. No public mention of estranged family in obituary. No shared photos. No condolences requested. Eulogy rights assigned to Dr. Lisette Marsh. Her reflection hovered faintly in the darkened screen. Calm, purposeful. Not the woman who'd once begged for a blanket, not anymore. She scrolled to the next section, typing one more clause with steady precision. Memorial donations to go directly to North Minneapolis Animal Shelter in honor of Oscar Lane. Oscar, hearing his name, wagged his tail once. There you go, Marjorie said. Your legacy's cleaner than mine ever was. Her phone vibrated again, a text this time. Reese. Hey, Grandma. Saw Mom's post. You mad at me? She read it twice. Her first instinct. A sigh. But something about the wording gave her pause. Mad at me. Not sorry. Not how are you. Just self-preservation, wrapped in guilt. She stared out the window, watching the wind lift soft spirals of snow across the porch. Then she typed slowly. Marjorie. Still deciding. 3 dots flickered at the bottom of the screen. Appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then vanished for good. She locked the phone and set it face down. Her tea had gone cold, untouched. She carried it to the sink, poured it out, and rinsed the cup clean. The water ran steaming and bright, blurring the reflection in the window until it was just light and motion. When she returned to the living room, she found Oscar sitting upright by the fire grate, head tilted toward the safe across the room, the one that held the trust. His ears twitched. I know, she said, lowering herself into the chair. We're not done yet. She opened her notebook again, this time a physical one. Blue leather, the kind she'd kept since her teaching days. On the first blank page, she wrote, What they post isn't truth, it's camouflage. She stared at the words until they blurred into the paper grain. A gust of wind rattled the windows, and a snowflake drifted through a tiny crack near the sill, landing in the flame's orange light. It hissed away instantly. Marjorie reached for her phone again, not to scroll, but to open the camera. She turned it on herself for the first time in months. The image on the screen showed her face lined but luminous in the firelight. Oscar curled behind her chair. She pressed the shutter once. The sound was sharp and clean, not vanity, not vengeance. Documentation. Then she whispered, almost smiling, Your move, Tina. Outside, the snow thickened again, soft, endless, and consuming. And in the dark reflection of the window, her own image stared back at her. Still, deliberate, unafraid. The snow had thinned to a drifting lace by the time Marjorie made her next decision. The morning air was brittle and bright, sunlight bouncing off the frozen lawn like shards of glass. She sat at her kitchen table, the same one that had witnessed so many quiet reckonings, and unfolded a fresh sheet of stationery. The heading read, Obituary Draft, Marjorie Lane, Preliminary. She'd started it weeks ago, but now the words flowed easily, almost calmly. There was no sadness in them, only precision. Marjorie Elaine Lane, 71, of Minneapolis, passed peacefully at home surrounded by loyalty, love, and warmth. She is survived by her golden retriever, Oscar Lane, and a community of care that never failed her. No mention of Tina, no mention of Reese. She stopped for a moment, reading it aloud in a low voice. The words filled the room like the faint hum of a hymn. Oscar rested his chin on her knee, as if listening. "Don't worry," she said softly. "They'll get the message." When she finished the draft, she slid it into a file folder labeled Final Affairs. Then she picked up her phone and dialed Dr. Lisette Marsh. The surgeon's voice came through steady and warm. "Mrs. Lane, I was just thinking of you. How's the hip?" "Healing," Marjorie said. "But that's not why I called." A pause. "All right. What's on your mind?" "I want to speak at the hospital," she said plainly. "During Patient Advocacy Week. I want to tell them what it's like when no one answers." Dr. Marsh was silent for several seconds. When she finally spoke, her voice was lower. "You're serious." "I'm done being quiet," Marjorie said. "I don't want sympathy. I want witness." Marsh exhaled softly. "Then I'll make the call. And for the record, I think it's about time someone said it out loud." "Thank you," Marjorie said. "Title it, What Happens When No One Answers. That should do." By the next afternoon, the hospital's communications office had confirmed it. Marjorie Lane, former teacher, recent patient, would deliver a 10-minute keynote for their live-streamed event on patient dignity and elder care. Eloise came by that same evening with her briefcase. "You're really going through with this?" she asked, removing her gloves. "I am," Marjorie said, pouring tea. "And I want you to handle the release. When I'm gone, everything, the speech, the obituary, the trust summary, goes to the press. Automatically." Eloise raised a brow. "You're giving them a posthumous confession?" "A correction," Marjorie said evenly. "To the story they'll try to tell once they realize the money's gone." Eloise smiled faintly. "You never did like letting someone else control the narrative?" "No," Marjorie said. "I just finally learned how to write my own." They went through the logistics, the legal authorizations, the press distribution, the funding for a small public service announcement she'd commissioned, 30 seconds of truth that would air across local radio and hospital channels. The copy was short, written in her own hand. "This message is dedicated to every patient who waited for an answer that never came. We see you. We won't be silent." When Eloise read it aloud, her tone softened. "You know, this is going to make waves." "Good," Marjorie said. "Maybe someone's conscience will catch one." For the next several days, she practiced her speech by the fire. She didn't use notes. She didn't need to. The words had lived inside her long enough. "They say no one owes anyone anything," she rehearsed. "But I've learned that silence can be a kind of theft. The moment you ignore someone's need, you steal their belief that they matter." Oscar would tilt his head each time she spoke those lines, as if sensing the charge in her voice. When she finally delivered the speech, the hospital auditorium was small, but packed. Staff, volunteers, a few patients in wheelchairs along the back wall. Dr. Marsh stood beside the stage, arms crossed, protective pride in her eyes. Marjorie took the podium. Her cane leaned against the wood. She looked out at the faces, the quiet anticipation. "When I sent that message," she began, "I wasn't asking for the world. Just a blanket. Just help feeding my dog." A murmur rippled through the audience. She smiled faintly. No one came, and yet, that silence taught me more than kindness ever could. When she finished, the applause wasn't thunderous, it was reverent. A standing ovation of quiet solidarity. Dr. Marsh joined her on stage afterward, resting a hand on her shoulder. "They'll hear it," she said softly, "whether they want to or not." That night, back home, Marjorie sat beside the fire again, Oscar sleeping soundly against her leg. Her phone buzzed once. An unfamiliar number. She opened the message. From Tina Lane. "I heard about your little speech. You're humiliating us. This has gone too far." A minute later, an email came through. Subject: "Mom, what are you doing? You need to take all that down before people start asking questions. I can't believe you'd do this to family." Marjorie read the lines slowly, the same way she'd once graded term papers, checking for sincerity and finding none. She moved the message into a folder marked Evidence, the same one that held Tina's brunch photo. Then she composed a single-sentence reply. "Family shows up, Tina. That's how it works." She hit send, closed her laptop, and leaned back in her chair. Outside, the snow had started again. Light at first, then heavier. A curtain falling over the world. Oscar stirred in his sleep, and Marjorie whispered to the darkness. One more truth told, a few more to go. The fire popped sharply, echoing like a gavel in an empty courtroom. The snow had grown heavier overnight, coating the city in a quiet that felt almost reverent. Marjorie sat at her writing desk by the window, the light outside dim and pearled. The embers from last night's fire still glowed faintly in the hearth, their soft hiss the only sound in the house besides Oscar's breathing. Her inbox chimed. The subject line was predictable enough. From Tina Lane. "You're breaking the family." Marjorie opened it without hesitation. "I don't know what's gotten into you. This is cruel, Mom. You're humiliating us in front of everyone. The hospital, your friends, whoever's watching. I've spent years building our family's reputation, and now you're tearing it apart because of one bad week. I'm begging you to stop before people start asking questions. Please." Marjorie stared at the screen. The words "our family's reputation" hung there like frost on glass, delicate, meaningless, gone with the first breath of truth. She hit forward, typed Eloise Tan into the address line, and added a short note at the top, for the contestation block file. Add under Emotional Appeals. She clicked send and shut the laptop. Across the room, Oscar stretched, shaking his fur until the tags on his collar jingled. He patted over, pressing his warm muzzle against her knee. She smiled, reaching down to stroke his head. "You, my dear, have never sent an email in your life, and somehow you've never once disappointed me." She stood carefully, bracing herself on the edge of the table, and walked to the counter where her phone sat charging. The red voicemail icon blinked like an accusation. She opened the settings menu, tapped voicemail greeting, and recorded a new one. Her voice came out clear, steady, without apology. "Hello, this is Marjorie Lane. If you're calling to argue, hang up. If you're calling to listen, you're welcome to leave a message. Otherwise, silence will suit us both." She played it back once, nodded to herself, and saved the change. Oscar tilted his head, as if waiting for the next move. "Come on," she said, reaching for his leash. "Let's take a walk. We've got nothing to hide from anymore." Outside, the cold bit at her cheeks, sharp and clean. The park across from her house stretched wide under the gray sky, its paths buried beneath a soft quilt of snow. Bare trees stood like quiet sentinels. The air smelled of pine and distant wood smoke. Oscar trotted ahead, tail waving like a flag of triumph. The little vest she'd ordered for him had arrived that morning, navy blue with a patch stitched across the back. My comfort didn't fail her. A gift from Eloise slipped into the last batch of signed paperwork with a note that simply read, "He's earned his title." As they crossed the park, people glanced. Some smiled. Some looked twice at the words on Oscar's vest. Marjorie met every gaze head-on. No embarrassment, no retreat. Only a quiet kind of pride. A man at a nearby bench chuckled softly as Oscar bounded past. "That's a statement," he said. Marjorie smiled. "It's the truth," she replied and kept walking. She followed the trail down toward the frozen pond. The ice gleamed under the muted light, smooth as glass. A few children threw snowballs at the far end, their laughter carrying through the cold. She paused near the bridge railing, breathing in the crisp air, her breath rising like smoke. Oscar sat obediently beside her, watching the birds skimming the ice. Marjorie reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded sheet, a printout of Tina's latest email, creased neatly in half. She read it once more, then tore it into strips. The pieces fluttered down like pale leaves, vanishing into the snow below. "Breaking the family," she said quietly, almost to herself. "No, Tina. I'm rebuilding one." She turned her face toward the wind, closing her eyes. For the first time in months, her chest felt light. Not empty, cleared. When she opened them again, the horizon was beginning to brighten. The faintest trace of sun filtering through the clouds. "Come on, boy," she said. "Let's leave footprints they'll have to follow." Oscar barked once, bounding ahead, his vest catching the light. Marjorie followed, her cane tapping rhythm against the path. Firm, confident, defiant. Back at home, as she brushed the snow from her coat, she saw the red notification light blinking again on her phone. Another email from Tina, the subject line half visible. "You've gone to..." Marjorie didn't even open it. She held the power button until the screen went dark. The house fell into quiet again, but this time, it wasn't loneliness. It was ownership. She hung up her coat, set her cane by the door, and looked out the window, where her footprints trailed through the snow like a declaration. In the distance, the wind swept over them, half burying the prints, but never fully erasing their path. "Let it cover what it wants," she said softly. "I still know where it leads." Oscar pressed against her leg, eyes half closed. Marjorie smiled and whispered, "They'll see soon enough." The knock came just after noon, soft, hesitant, almost apologetic. Marjorie had been sitting in her armchair reading through Eloise's latest letter about trust management updates, the kind written with legal precision and subtle reassurance. Oscar lifted his head first, ears pricking toward the sound. Marjorie looked up from the papers, her pulse steady. Few people knocked anymore. A pause followed, the kind that waits for permission. She rose slowly, her hips stiff from the cold, and made her way to the door. Through the frosted glass, a figure stood bundled in a dark parka, snowflakes clinging to the shoulders. A familiar shape. When she opened the door, the wind slipped in with him. And with it, the faint scent of campus laundry soap and regret. "Hi, Grandma," Reese said quietly. Marjorie didn't answer right away. She simply looked at him. At the face she used to kiss goodnight. At the eyes that once looked up at her with unfiltered trust. He was older now, sharper around the jaw, but the boy she'd known was still there. He held out a grocery bag with both hands. Inside, a thick wool blanket and a box of dog biscuits. He cleared his throat. "I thought maybe Oscar could use these, and you could probably use the blanket." The words hung between them like fragile truce flags. Marjorie stepped aside. "Come in, Reese." He obeyed, brushing the snow from his boots before crossing the threshold. Oscar trotted over immediately, tail wagging, curiosity replacing suspicion. The moment Reese crouched, the old golden retriever pressed his head into his knee with a low, forgiving sound. "He remembers you," Marjorie said softly. Reese smiled faintly, running a hand over Oscar's fur. I didn't know how bad it got, he said. His voice cracked around the edges. She lied, Grandma. Mom said you were fine. Said the hospital had you taken care of, that you didn't need us. Marjorie studied him for a moment. His sincerity was unpolished, his guilt unperformed. He looked like someone who'd seen the truth too late and was still reeling from it. I know, she said simply. He looked up, startled. You do? I knew she'd lie. What I didn't know, Marjorie said, her voice measured, was whether you'd ever ask for yourself. Reese's eyes dropped. I should have. Yes, she said. You should have. The fire cracked once in the hearth, punctuating the quiet. Snow tapped softly against the window. Oscar shifted his weight, resting his chin on Reese's foot. The gesture so natural, so unforced, that it seemed to absolve him in ways words couldn't. They sat like that for a while. Marjorie in her armchair, Reese on the floor beside the dog, both watching the flames dance in the grate. I've been watching your speech, he said finally, the one at the hospital. I didn't know you could talk like that. So calm, so fierce. Marjorie's lips curved faintly. I had a lot of practice being unheard. When people finally listen, you learn to make it count. Reese nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. Mom's furious. She says you're trying to punish us. She's wrong. He looked up again. I'm not punishing anyone, Marjorie continued. I'm protecting what matters. Reese's gaze lingered on the folder resting on the side table. The one labeled Trust Documentation. His throat worked as he swallowed. Is there anything left for me to make right? Marjorie didn't answer immediately. She leaned forward, the firelight painting gold across her face. You're still out, she said, but not permanently. The hope in his expression flickered, faint, cautious, but real. What do I have to do? Her eyes softened. Live differently. Show up when someone calls for help. It's simpler than people think, but harder than they want it to be. Reese nodded, his voice low. I can do that. We'll see. She gestured toward the fire. You'll stay for tea? He hesitated, then nodded. If you don't mind. Marjorie stood, moving to the kitchen with her slow, deliberate steps. As she filled the kettle, she caught sight of their reflection in the glass. Her grandson seated cross-legged by the fire, Oscar leaning into him as though guarding his place there. It struck her then. Forgiveness was not a moment, but a trial. Quiet, conditional, and earned in increments. When she returned with 2 mugs, the house felt different. Not warmer exactly, but lighter, as if some small part of the winter had lifted its weight from the rafters. Reese took the cup with both hands. Thank you, he said. Marjorie nodded. You're welcome. For now. They drank in silence, steam rising between them. Outside, the storm had slowed to a hush. Beyond the window, a figure moved at the end of the driveway. A woman's silhouette, pacing once, then retreating toward the street. Tina. Marjorie's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She watched her daughter vanish into the whiteness, then turned back toward her grandson. Finish your tea, she said calmly. We'll talk about next time. Reese nodded again, guilt softening into gratitude, and as the firelight glowed around them, Marjorie's eyes caught the faintest reflection of movement, a shadow at the edge of the window pane, watching, waiting. The snow had finally melted into a brittle crust, the kind that cracked underfoot like thin ice. Morning light stretched across the hardwood floor of Marjorie's living room, revealing the dust motes that spun lazily in the air, quiet witnesses to another kind of reckoning. On the coffee table sat a single manila envelope, thick and official, sealed with a silver clip. Across the front, in Eloise's tidy handwriting, were 4 words: Conditional Trust Agreement. Lane Estate. Marjorie sat on the couch, posture straight, expression unreadable. Oscar lay curled at her side, his head resting on her thigh. The fire burned low, its light steady but subdued, as though it too were listening. Reese stood by the door, hat in hand. He looked like someone walking into a courtroom he didn't quite belong in. "Come in," Marjorie said, her tone gentle but firm. "We'll keep this simple." He nodded, closing the door behind him. His eyes flicked to the envelope. "That for me?" Marjorie's lips curved faintly. "That depends on how you read it." Before he could respond, another knock sounded. Eloise entered, her presence calm, professional. She greeted Marjorie with a brief smile, then turned to Reese. "You must be the grandson I've heard so much about." Reese flushed slightly. "I'm afraid not all of it's good." Eloise smiled faintly. "That's why we're here, isn't it?" A moment later, the door opened again and Dr. Lisette Marsh stepped in, her hair pulled back, her white coat replaced with a dark wool one. She carried a clipboard and a kind of quiet authority that filled the space. "Afternoon, Mrs. Lane," she said. Then to Reese, "I thought you might like a little accountability present." Reese blinked. "You're here for this too?" Dr. Marsh nodded. "Witness and healthcare proxy. Your grandmother doesn't do anything halfway." Marjorie gestured toward the table. "Let's begin then." Eloise took her seat across from them, opening the envelope and sliding a stack of papers neatly into view. The crisp sound of the documents filled the room. Sharp, deliberate, final. "Mr. Lane," Eloise began, "this is a conditional trust addendum. It outlines specific terms under which your inheritance may be reconsidered." Reese swallowed hard. "Terms?" "2 years of volunteering," Marjorie said. "At the North Minneapolis Animal Shelter. Minimum 20 hours a month. That's where Oscar's donation fund goes. You'll help build what that money creates." Reese nodded slowly. "I can do that." "No financial requests," she continued. "From me, from the trust, from Dr. Marsh, from Eloise. Not a single one. You stand on your own 2 feet. If I hear otherwise, the clause dissolves." He nodded again, quieter this time. "And," she said, her eyes meeting his, "you visit. Once a month. In person. No phones, no posting. Just you, me, and time." The room went still. Even the fire seemed to pause, its rhythm syncing with the silence. Reese looked at the paper, then back at her. "That's all?" "That's everything," Marjorie said. Eloise turned the final page toward him. "If you agree, sign here." Reese picked up the pen, his hand trembling slightly. He read the paragraph twice, lips moving silently. Then he signed. The sound of ink on paper was small, but resonant, like a key turning in a long-locked door. Eloise slid the papers toward Marjorie, who added her own signature beneath his. Slow, steady, absolute. Dr. Marsh took the clipboard, her eyes on Reese. "He means it," she said quietly, nodding once. "I can tell." Marjorie exhaled softly. "Time will tell," she replied. Oscar stirred, sensing the tone shift, and placed one paw gently on Reese's knee. The gesture broke something in the air. A tension too fine to name. Reese smiled for the first time, a real one, small, but warm. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, scratching behind Oscar's ear. "Guess we're both on probation, huh?" Eloise closed the folder, her professional tone returning. "That's all then. Dr. Marsh and I will file this copy with the trust office tomorrow." Marjorie nodded. "Thank you both." The two women exchanged a knowing glance, the quiet kind shared between people who've witnessed a promise being tested, not just spoken. As they gathered their coats, Reese stood and extended a hand toward his grandmother. She took it, her grip firm, steady. "I won't waste this chance," he said. "You'll prove that by not saying it again," she replied, but there was no sting in her voice, only truth. When the door closed behind Eloise and Dr. Marsh, the house felt different. Not just quieter, but charged, like something had shifted in its bones. Marjorie turned toward the fire, then back to Reese. "Tea?" He smiled faintly. "Sure." She moved to the kitchen, cane tapping in slow rhythm against the tile. Reese knelt by Oscar, whispering something that made the old retriever wag his tail in approval. In the other room, Marjorie filled the kettle and let her thoughts settle like ash after a storm. She had drawn her boundaries, built her proof, set her test. Now, for the first time, she realized she was ready. Not for war, but for peace that had to be earned. From the doorway, Reese's voice drifted in, soft and uncertain. "Grandma." "Yes? Do you ever think she'll understand?" Marjorie paused, her hand hovering over the kettle. "Tina?" He nodded. She shook her head once. "Some people hear apologies. Others only hear loss. We'll see which comes first." The kettle began to whistle, and outside, snow started to fall again. Slow, deliberate flakes landing against the window pane, like signatures written by the sky. Oscar barked once, short and bright, as if in agreement. The courthouse smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old paper. That specific blend of bureaucracy and judgment. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the streets glazed with ice. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed, sharp and merciless. Marjorie sat at the plaintiff's table in her navy coat, hands folded on her cane. Oscar wasn't allowed inside, but his absence pressed at her like a missing heartbeat. Eloise sat beside her, calm and immovable, a stack of bound documents before her like ammunition. Across the aisle, Tina fidgeted, her expensive coat draped across her chair, her hair immaculate in that brittle, too-perfect way that suggested panic disguised as control. Reese sat behind her, silent. Not beside her, behind her. The courtroom doors closed with a hollow thud. Judge Harriet Klein adjusted her glasses, flipping through the case file with deliberate precision. "All right, let's review this again for the record," she said. "We're here regarding the contestation of the Lane Trust and will revision, filed by Ms. Tina Lane against her mother, Marjorie Lane." Tina stood quickly, voice trembling with urgency. "Your Honor, I'm not contesting the right to make changes. I'm contesting why they were made. My mother wasn't in her right mind when she did all this. She'd just had major surgery. She was under emotional distress." Eloise didn't even glance at her. "With respect, Your Honor," she said smoothly. "Mrs. Lane was in full mental and legal capacity at the time of every signing. The witness list includes a physician, Dr. Lisette Marsh, and 2 licensed attorneys, including myself. There are also audio recordings verifying her statements of intent." The judge's gaze shifted to Marjorie. "Mrs. Lane, can you confirm this?" Marjorie met her eyes steadily. "I can. Every decision was mine, made freely, and I have the messages and recordings to remind me why." Tina exhaled sharply. "You're using one text message, one mistake, to ruin your own family?" Marjorie's tone was even, but cold. "No, dear. I'm using a lifetime of silence." A murmur rippled through the back of the courtroom. Reese looked down at his hands. The judge cleared her throat. "Ms. Tan, you mentioned recordings?" Eloise nodded. "Submitted as Exhibit C through G audio of Mrs. Lane's directives, hospital transcripts, voicemail logs, and authenticated text message history." Judge Klein nodded. "Proceed." The clerk pressed play. First came Marjorie's voice, steady, tired, but lucid. "Could someone bring me a blanket or help me feed Oscar?" Then came the silence, the long, digital stillness of unanswered need. Next, a hospital nurse's voice. "You don't have anyone local?" Followed by Marjorie's faint reply. "My daughter's in town. She's just busy." The sound of her own voice filled the room like a haunting. When the recording stopped, the silence in the courtroom was deafening. Judge Klein leaned back. "I think that's sufficient." Tina stood abruptly. "That doesn't prove anything. She's twisting this. She's angry. She's lonely. And she's punishing me for not being perfect." Reese's voice cut through, quiet but firm. "She's not punishing you, Mom. She's just done waiting for you to show up." Tina turned, her face breaking. Disbelief, betrayal, something wild and unfinished. "Reese." But he didn't meet her eyes. The judge's gavel came down softly once, not to silence, but to anchor the moment. "I've heard enough," she said. "Mrs. Lane was competent. The documents are airtight. The evidence reflects clear intent and no coercion." She adjusted her glasses, looking directly at Tina. "What I see here isn't neglect of the law. It's neglect of love. And that's not something a court can undo." Tina's knees buckled slightly as she sank back into her chair. "Please," she whispered. "She's my mother." Marjorie's expression didn't waver. "You remembered that word too late." The judge's final ruling was swift. Motion denied, contestation rejected. Further legal challenges from Miss Lane are barred by clause and court order. Case closed. The gavel struck again, sharp as glass. Reese stood slowly, glancing toward his grandmother. She gave a small nod, not of triumph, but of closure. Then she rose, her cane clicking softly on the tile as she walked out. Outside, the air was bitter and brilliant. Eloise joined her on the courthouse steps, tucking her gloves on. "It's all done," she said. "She can't touch it. Not the trust, not the will, not the home." Marjorie drew in a breath, exhaled steam. Good. Let silence do what words couldn't. Reese came out a moment later, looking uncertain, almost boyish again. "You okay?" Marjorie gave him a small smile. "Better than I've been in years." He nodded once, glancing back through the courthouse doors, where Tina still sat inside, shoulders shaking, head bowed. They didn't speak of her. Not then. Not ever again. Later, at home, Marjorie lit the fire herself. The flames flared to life easily, obediently. Oscar curled beside her, head heavy on her slipper, warmth radiating against her ankle. She watched the blaze for a long time before speaking. "You know, boy," she said softly, "justice isn't loud, it's just steady." The clock ticked. The fire hissed. Eloise's words echoed in her head. "She can't touch it." Marjorie reached for her phone, scrolled to the last unread message from Tina. "I'll fight this." "You'll see." She hit delete. Then she whispered into the crackling light. "You already did, sweetheart, and you lost." Outside, the first flakes of a new storm began to fall, drifting softly against the window pane. And for the first time since the hospital, Marjorie closed her eyes and slept. Not out of exhaustion, but peace. The morning after the verdict, the house felt unnaturally still, a silence so complete it seemed to hum. The snow had stopped falling during the night, and the light that spilled through the kitchen windows was sharp and cold, the kind that made everything look a little too honest. Marjorie sat at her desk by the window, a steaming cup of coffee beside her and a blank notebook open in front of her. The pen hovered over the first page for several seconds before she began to write. The first line came easily, unfiltered, unedited. "The cold was the first thing I felt." She paused, watching her own handwriting, slow, deliberate, almost elegant in its precision. Then she continued. "It wasn't the kind of cold that seeps through walls or blankets. It was the kind that settles in the space where someone should have stood." Oscar lay on the rug near her feet, the steady rhythm of his breathing grounding her as the words began to spill. She wrote about the hospital, about the smell of antiseptic and the hum of machines that pretended to care, about the way her text message had glowed on her phone screen, small, polite, pleading, and how no one had answered. I had asked for a blanket, not salvation, not a miracle, just warmth. The pen didn't shake. The anger had burned away months ago, leaving only clarity. She wrote about Oscar's empty kennel and the way the nurse's question, "You don't have anyone local?" had felt like an autopsy of her own worth. She wrote about the silence that followed, how it had taught her more than the noise of family dinners ever had. It's strange. The moment you stop waiting for an answer, you don't break. You don't cry. You simply fold into yourself and understand that love, like faith, is only real when someone shows up. By noon, 5 pages were filled. She stopped only when her hand began to ache. She took a sip of her coffee, now lukewarm, and leaned back in the chair. Her gaze drifted to the framed photograph on the desk. Oscar as a puppy. Muddy paws and uncontainable joy. "You were the only one who didn't need to be asked twice," she murmured. The phone buzzed once, a reminder from Eloise, their standing call. Marjorie picked up. "You're punctual, as always," she said. "I try," Eloise replied, her voice warm but clipped with the efficiency of someone who dealt in closure. "How are you holding up after the hearing?" "Lighter," Marjorie said. "I slept. That's something." "I'm glad. You deserve rest." "I'm working on something," Marjorie continued. "An essay, maybe. For the Star Tribune. I'm calling it Unseen Doesn't Mean Gone." There was a brief pause on the line. Then Eloise's tone softened. "You always did have a way with words." "I used to think so," Marjorie said. "Now I just use them to tell the truth." "I can help you place it when it's ready," Eloise offered. "Would you want it published now or later?" Marjorie looked out the window. The sky was a bright, pale blue, the kind of color that made her think of distance. "Later," she said finally, "when I'm not around to hear the excuse." Eloise chuckled softly. "That's very you." "I hope so," Marjorie replied. When the call ended, she closed her notebook and stared at it for a long time. Then she slid it into the drawer beside her will and the trust documents, aligning it perfectly. She'd already written the note that would accompany it, sealed in an envelope marked, "To be published upon my death." She rose slowly, crossing to the fireplace. The coals were cool now, gray and spent. She crouched with effort, adding kindling and a single log, then struck a match. The flames rose again, catching fast. Oscar padded over and lay down beside her, pressing his body close. His warmth was solid, unquestioning. "You've been my proof of concept," she whispered, running her fingers through his fur. "That love can still arrive when called." He sighed in that way only dogs do, content, trusting, infinite. As the firelight flickered across her face, Marjorie opened her notebook once more, turning to the final line she'd written that morning. She read it aloud, her voice steady, almost reverent. "The opposite of being remembered isn't being forgotten. It's being ignored while you're still here." Her eyes lingered on the sentence, the ink still fresh, gleaming slightly in the glow. "Not anymore," she said quietly. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the window panes. The sky had begun to dim again, a slow descent into the soft indigo of another Minneapolis evening. Marjorie closed the notebook and set it on the mantel, beside the framed photo of her younger self, smiling, unscarred by silence. She watched the two reflections, the woman she was and the woman she'd become, merge in the firelight until they were indistinguishable. Oscar leaned closer, his nose nudging her hand. She smiled faintly, resting her palm on his head. "Good boy," she whispered. "We're almost done." And as the fire cracked, she looked toward the drawer that held her final words, ready, sealed, and waiting, and said to the quiet room, "When they read it, they'll finally have to listen." Spring came slowly that year, more like a surrender than a season. The ice retreated from the gutters one drop at a time, and the sidewalks emerged pale and slick, as if reluctant to be seen again. Marjorie sat by the window in her living room, a wool shawl over her shoulders, Oscar at her feet. The house was quiet, save for the tick of the clock and the faint creak of the old pipes thawing in the walls. Her phone buzzed once on the table beside her. A single text. Reese. Can I come by? Do you need anything? She stared at it for a moment, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. The sunlight caught the rim of her glasses, glinting. Then she typed. Slowly, deliberately. Marjorie. Yes. And a blanket. The same words she had sent once before. Unchanged. But this time, she knew they would be answered. By the time the knock came, the light outside had turned honey soft, the kind that made even the air feel patient. Oscar's tail began to thump before Marjorie could rise. When she opened the door, Reese stood there, bundled in his parka, cheeks flushed from the cold. He held a thick gray blanket folded neatly over one arm and a small brown paper bag in the other. From the bakery, he said. Still warm? Marjorie smiled, stepping aside. Then come in before it's not. He set the bag on the table and unfolded the blanket, draping it gently across her lap. It smelled faintly of detergent and sunlight. Better? He asked. Better, she said. Oscar ambled over, nosing the paper bag until Reese laughed and took out 2 rolls, steam still rising from their crusts. He broke one in half and handed it to Marjorie. She took a slow bite, the warmth spreading through her chest in a way she hadn't felt in years. They ate in silence. Not the strained kind that had filled so many dinners of her past, but the kind that held understanding. Quiet. Shared. Sufficient. When the rolls were gone, Marjorie reached for the folder resting on the table beside her chair, the same leather one she'd carried since that first meeting with Eloise. She laid it between them and opened it. This, she said, is the final version. Reese straightened slightly. His expression held both curiosity and reverence, as though he understood this wasn't paperwork. It was scripture. She turned the pages slowly, her fingers tracing the lines she knew by heart. Your name, she said, tapping the second page, has been reinstated. Officially. He looked up, eyes glimmering with something raw. Grandma, Don't, she interrupted gently. Just know it wasn't automatic. It was earned. He nodded once, swallowing hard. She turned another page. Tina's name has been removed. Permanently. The court order holds. The trust is sealed. Reese didn't speak, but his jaw tightened, an old ache passing through him like a ghost he didn't know how to bury. And here, she said softly, Oscar's care is guaranteed. When I'm gone, this house and his trust remain tied together. He'll never wonder where home is. Oscar let out a quiet sigh at the sound of his name, as if acknowledging the deal. Marjorie leaned back in her chair. You were the only one who came back, Reese. He looked at her then, really looked. And for the first time she saw the man he was trying to become. I'll never forget the text, he said. Neither will I, she replied. But I've rewritten what it means. He smiled faintly. You always do. They sat like that as the sun slipped lower, painting the room in soft orange light. The fire in the grate flickered to life, its warmth steady and low. Oscar curled against her chair, one paw draped over her slipper. Marjorie reached for her notebook on the side table, the same one that held her essay, Unseen Doesn't Mean Gone. She ran her hand over its cover, then looked back at her grandson. When you find this someday, she said quietly, read the last line out loud. It's how I'd like to be remembered. Reese frowned slightly, puzzled. Last line? She smiled, tired but sure. You'll know it when you see it. He didn't press her. Some things didn't need explaining. As evening deepened, Reese stood to leave. He folded the blanket back over the arm of her chair and she reached out, resting a hand over his. "Keep showing up," she said. "I will," he promised. When the door closed behind him, Marjorie remained still, listening to the faint crunch of his boots fading down the walk. The fire popped once, echoing through the quiet room. She looked down at Oscar, who had already fallen asleep, his breath warm against her leg. "Good boy," she whispered. Then, slowly, she opened her notebook to the final page, her handwriting steady despite the tremor in her hand. She wrote one last line, not for the paper, not for the court, but for herself. After my operation, I texted, "Please, someone bring a blanket or help me feed him." No one answered, so I answered them in my will. She set the pen down, exhaled, and closed the book. Outside, dusk settled over Minneapolis, soft and certain. The firelight flared, catching the edge of the notebook's cover, until her reflection and the flame became one, quiet, fierce, and at peace.